Hey everybody, welcome back to Your Full Crew. I'm Dawn Zoldi, one of your hosts.
Hi, I'm Mike Peel, your other co-host, and we've got a great show for you today. We've got some awesome sponsors who've been supporting us. That would be True Weather, Tulsa Innovation Labs, Skydio, and Airspace Link. I've got a barking dog in the background this morning, so I'm going to just try to push through the intros real quick. We're going to be talking about some great topics today, including $80 billion in industrial policy investment, the evolution of battery tech and its impact on communities and the planet. We're also going to be talking about ChatGPT. Is it all it's cracked up to be? And finally, we're going to end the show with, can an AI lawyer represent you in court? All interesting topics, and we've got some great speakers to talk about these things today. So first up, we've got Daniel. Daniel, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really great to be joining and excited for these topics. My name is Daniel Plaisance. I work for an economic development organization called Tulsa Innovation Labs. Our mission is to build a thriving tech and entrepreneurial community in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We make investments in R&D and workforce and industrial infrastructure that's necessary to accelerate four key industries, both locally and then also nationally. I lead the UAS and AAM portfolio for TIL, and we also focus on cyber, virtual health, and energy tech.
Awesome. And we also have Maria. So Maria, tell us a little bit about yourself.
And thank you very much, Mike. And hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Mariya Tarabanovska. I'm the founder of Flight Crowd. And Flight Crowd, we're not-for-profit based here in the UK. We're focusing on supporting the growing future flight sector, be it drones, be it so-called air taxis, electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. We're here to very much bridge the gap between the industry and the public, ensure that there is a growing talent base and future workforce. We're doing loads of public engagement on behalf of the industry, and we're focusing on making sure that the public has that friendly face almost, and somebody where they can go and ask the questions and learn about the industry, but also start their journey, start their learning journey. So thank you very much.
Well, we're happy to have you both. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our first article we're going to be discussing is Daniel's. So tell us about this $80 billion surge and where it came from.
Yeah, absolutely. So you may be familiar with several of the components of this, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, for instance. Essentially, this article is talking about over the last few years in the United States, there's been a huge surge, $80 billion surge, more or less, to kick off specific industries and strengthen specific industries in the US. It's the biggest non-defense piece of spending like this in several decades. And really what I find interesting about it is that the investment has the dual goal of trying to support the national interest, diversify supply chains, and strengthen manufacturing, and investing in critical technologies like batteries, as we'll talk about later, or semiconductors and chips. But also diversifying local economies that have been vulnerable to disruption and struggling to catch up with some of the high-tech jobs and high-tech shifts in the economy. So one thing that I found particularly interesting about this article, and we see it a lot in our work as well, is based on the structure of some of these programs, the government really is picking winners and losers between regions. So they're awarding specific concentrated investments in particular places. We recently won one of these investments. We got about $40 million and then $30 million in local match to support the growth of the UAS and AAM cluster in Tulsa, which is just the beginning, certainly. But it is really interesting for, I think, the tech industry to start paying attention to where these investments are going and how that could shape the future development of this industry and several other industries as well.
Maria, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, thank you, Dana. It was really interesting to take a look at it, and certainly myself, when I hear the industrial policy, that sort of phrase, I immediately start thinking, oh God, industrial revolution, being here based in the UK as well, of course, and thinking, oh right, okay, well this is all about productivity and about 9 to 5, but how about creativity, and how about greater flexibility that people, of course, require? But no, I see where it's coming from, and especially that sort of focus on the local communities and local economies, and sort of trying to nurture that talent, the local talent. I think it's certainly very, very important. I guess my thoughts are, how do you attract talent? Is it through the policies, or is it in the industry's hands? Do we sort of, as companies, do the businesses need to create those environments that will be attracting talent, or is it that, again, it's in the hands of the regulators? I think this is really great to see that the government is certainly sort of trying to shift their mindset and trying to invest into the people, where it seems. But yeah, I think it's always a question of how do people respond, and what's in it for me, isn't it? But yeah, no, it's a great to learn more about it. Thank you.
I'd love to fill in some facts here because I'm a total nerd. And what I found really interesting about this, a few things. Number one, the four statutes that Daniel is talking about that Congress passed recently, total 38 trillion, right, in investments in different ways. And this, what they're calling place-based industrial policy, accounts for about 80 billion of that. Now, as Daniel also said, this is not really new, but it's not something the country has done in a long time. So it's been more than 40 years since the federal government has really infused money specifically into certain places. And so some of the programs you may have heard before, the Tennessee Valley Authority and the Appalachian Regional Commission in the U.S., they've been, that was kind of in the 1950s and 1960s. What they're looking to do, and Daniel, I think, in the Tulsa Innovation Labs is a great example of this, create innovation hubs in certain areas. Now, to your point, Daniel, like it is interesting that we're picking winners and losers, and I'm saying we, meaning the government, because that's a double-edged sword, right? We see this, and Mike, I think you would agree, with the Defense Innovation Unit, Blue UAS program, and how that kind of mushroomed into kind of the haves and have-nots. And, once some of those companies got their foot in the door, it really accelerated their growth, possibly to the detriment of some others. So, it's just really interesting. But on the other hand, you know what? There's fairness here at the same time, because they're giving this money in a lot of ways through grants, and they're competitive grants. So I know, Daniel, you have that personal experience with obtaining the Build Back Better grant for Tulsa Innovation Labs. And so people are competing. It's not just, oh, we're going to pick Tulsa just because we're going to pick Tulsa. You guys had to put together a pretty extensive application and pitch deck and compete against other areas for it. But, so it's just kind of really interesting to see this happen. What do you think, Mike? And I believe you are muted, my friend.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to contend with the dog. But I think we've had 40 years of being kind of only on one side of kind of government investment or focus on they don't. In the United States, we haven't wanted to put our scale on the free market. And that's been very, very successful for us in a lot of ways. But post-pandemic, as things kind of shifted, or the focus shifted to rare earth minerals, production of chips, etc., some of the issues that we're facing require the focus of the federal government, and also kind of the incentives that they can lead with their giant purse for directing industry. We do want to be careful about not just picking winners, because ultimately that leads to an inferior product down the line. It might, give us the solution today, but without market forces eventually opening up to competition, basically you just get stuck funding this thing forever. So I think that's kind of where we're at. We got to make sure that the focus is about breeding competition and not just picking winners, but we do need to provide the focus, or we're not going to get past some of these huge economic challenges.
I want to hand it back over to Daniel for the final word on this, but I did want to highlight three other things, three kind of, let's just say staples to what is happening. So first of all, whereas Defense Innovation Unit, DoD, is playing a big role in the UAS market for the defense, it's the Department of Commerce here that is getting the lion's share of the authority here to pick these folks, right? So that's the first. The second thing is Challenge grants seem to be the predominant way that this money is going to flow. And the third is that clusters, meaning this kind of ecosystem, that they're really encouraging, companies, nonprofits, like all, schools, academic institutions, to collaborate together for these innovation hubs, if you will. So I just wanted to kind of make those 3 points, and I think you're going to see a lot more of this. And if you haven't heard of Tulsa Innovation Labs, once again, they're a perfect example, living example of this. So Daniel, over to you to kind of give us your final thoughts here and what you think we'll see in the future.
Yeah, I think all great points. We think smaller cities, if you look about at the last several decades, right, smaller cities across the country and across the world, they've been trying to cultivate these kinds of industries, right? But the shortage of, be it investment capital or brain drain or major R&D presences. You look at a place like Pittsburgh that has a huge R&D presence, funded in large part by a variety of sources, but by initially federal investment, right? And the kind of cluster and economy and innovation that's able to kick off. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how innovative companies and smart companies are going to need to develop strategies that include researching and developing and hiring for their technologies and their tech development process in places that they haven't really considered before. So we're excited to be a part of this, of course, and really excited to see how this plays out across the nation. As I mentioned, we're in the implementation phase. The Build Back Better grant that we won was one of the first for this. We're competitive for a number of others, but there really will be a wave of this, I think, that are designed, the architects of this are really designing it to set the stage for the next phase of economic development and of tech development across the country.
And you know what, it almost goes without saying, but I'm just going to say it anyway. For those companies out there, those entrepreneurs looking around, like, you really need to start looking at cities, and for those city planners out there, whether it's in the United States or in Europe, if you're not looking at partnering with industry, with nonprofits, with academic institutions, you're going to fall behind. Like, now is the time. So anyway, all is well, and really exciting times. And maybe we'll get to our next article here.
Yeah, we've got Mariya's article, and this is on battery technology. And in terms of impact on the world, I can think of few things that reach this level. So tell us a little bit about why you chose this article.
Yeah, no, thank you. And so my background, for those of you who don't know much about me, my background is in engineering. Even though I'm leading an organization that's sort of focused on public engagement and public education, I'm an aerospace engineer and I'm always very, very interested in all things technology and all things innovation. And with my interest being within the future mobility space, and especially looking into aviation and electric and sustainable aviation, battery is certainly up there and certainly discussed as one of those limiting technologies that can potentially delay or prevent from electric mobility, electric air mobility becoming a reality and a success in a large. I really chose this article because it's focusing not just on the promise, on the fact that we are going to, the demands are growing. Of course, the demands are growing. Of course, we as industries are not really keeping up, and the battery production industry is not keeping up with the demands. But it's also very, very interesting to see how look into the whole value supply chain issue. Again, talking about, giving an example of ourselves here in the UK, we've got recently an announcement that's been made about British Ford, one of the ones heralded as the Britain's potential champion for battery making. They fell into administration, and they had plans to build a gigafactory, in the billions of pounds, and create 3,000 jobs in one of the regions in the UK. And it was all about, all looking nice and promising. However, that is not happening. We've seen numerous examples around the world and the impact that those plans to the battery mining or mineral mining, and indeed sort of production of batteries, the impact that this has had on the world. Of course, it is fantastic to think about the potential of electric vehicles and how great and sustainable the mobility industries are going to be it again a ground transportation, automotive, or an aerospace industry. But we need to consider the sustainability aspect. We need to consider the aspect of how would something like a battery production or mining affect the local communities, the local economies. And for me, again, this is where my passion for public engagement and talking to the public, this is where this comes from. It's all about the jobs creation, but it's also about how we're going to, again, influence and impact the environment potentially negatively once we do sort of go into that whole value supply chain and emissions associated with mining and with sort of very much impacting the naturals. So I think it was just really looking at the problem from a different angle, and I would definitely recommend for readers and listeners to take a look.
Yeah, we've discussed battery technology a couple times on the podcast and alternatives. Certainly, the impact is starting to be known. We're seeing more articles about it, that's for sure, which is good. Daniel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think this is obviously a really important question and a really fascinating topic. One thing that I found interesting, and Mariya touched on it a little bit about this article, is how one of the big challenges is really going to be adapting to the continuously changing cutting edge in terms of battery tech, right? So it's very difficult to forecast what the technology and what the production constraints and all that will be, even in 2030, in that short amount of time. So companies that are doing this really need to be nimble in planning their supply chains, in making capital investment in equipment and materials that can be adaptable, and also with their workforce, right? So we think of 20th century jobs and we think manufacturing jobs mostly as being stable and in some ways sort of static, right? But even in these manufacturing industries in the 21st century, that's not really going to be the case necessarily, right? So they're similar in some ways to more disruptive industries, knowledge technology or knowledge industry jobs, and going to be vulnerable to just as much uncertainty and disruption potentially as other industries, which is going to have a huge impact on how companies invest, how they collaborate with the public and with researchers and startups and innovators, and also how they think about continuously training their workforce and making sure that they're investing in the long-term development of an industry and a cluster in ways that maybe manufacturing jobs don't traditionally.
Yeah, I was gonna jump in. I have so many thoughts on this because, just a couple weeks ago, I was at CES in Las Vegas. Battery technology was something on the floor. People were talking about. I went to a really interesting thought leadership dinner hosted by Robert Hastings. Robert is going to be on our Full Tilt leadership podcast next month. Retired Army Brigadier General, Texas Army National Guard, and also just left Bell Aviation. And so I'm at this dinner, and half the table were like the AAM crowd, right? Advanced Air Mobility, and half the table were the automotive crowd. And it was a really interesting crowd because there's a lot of connections between those two industries. And what I thought was really interesting were the automotive people really talking about how electric vehicles, electric cars, they have such a horrible environmental record, honestly, and they're touted as green. And I think, Mariya, your article really highlights the need to tackle these ESG, right, environmental, social, and governance issues in the technology, because there's so much promise there. But 3 points to make here. And by the way, Kevin Tynan from Bloomberg, he's a intelligence analyst. He's going to be on this show next month as well. So I can't wait to see what article he picks. But from an environmental standpoint, land degradation, biodiversity loss, creation of hazardous waste, contamination of water, soil, air, unprofessional, illegal battery disposal can lead to severe toxic pollution. So just a handful of things on the environmental side, challenges to overcome. Socially, some of these countries where these minerals are located, you're seeing violations of labor laws, child and forced labor, encroachment on indigenous rights and indigenous lands. And then from a governance standpoint, financial situations that involve corruption, bribery, funding armed conflicts, tax evasion. I mean, it's a horrible list from an ESG standpoint, because you think as you're driving your Tesla around, like, I'm doing something good for the environment, I'm just plugging in and I've got solar panels. But when you go back, kind of in that entire trail of how those batteries were created, there is for sure, I mean, there's, to be sure, a lot of work to be done. And I love how this article not just highlights the problems, but also highlights some solutions. This idea of a closed loop domestic supply chain that involves not only collection, but recycling, reuse, repair, not just of lithium ion batteries, but also looking into other kinds of technologies as well. So, so good on him for at least highlighting, not just the problems, but some potential solutions here. Mike, over to you.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we have to kind of also balance this against is current pollutants and current technology for energy production. So when we're talking about battery extraction, from what I've seen in over the last couple months reading up on this, since one of our guests brought it up about 3 months ago, is yes, battery technology in its initial stages, its impact at the get-go is much higher, right? So there's a bigger net negative on the environment to extract those minerals. And then we'll get back to the social aspect, because I think that's actually the most damaging side of this. But over the time driving your Tesla, you actually can feel good in terms of how much you've taken away from traditional sources of electricity, because of your ability to store and not lose that electricity once it's produced. And then also just the amount that you're getting out of it because of that factor. On the social side, though, it seems like we're recreating a lot of the problems we did with the initial birth of the oil industry worldwide, which was basically a rapacious kind of takeover of what at the time was called third world countries. And you're seeing all of the infrastructure and social issues that go through that or come from that, like child labor or just in general lax labor laws that are almost unhuman when you really kind of look at it. Like, for example, the environmental impact on the area where these chemicals are mined. I think we brought it up before. If a bird flies near it, it will disintegrate. It basically turns into a bird skeleton. So that's how toxic these chemicals are. That's, it's almost a comical image, but it really isn't comical because it's real. So I think if this is a technology that we're gonna live with and is going to have a net positive, we definitely have to sand off all the rough edges as much as possible. And then also there is great advancements in terms of finding alternatives to this. They just don't produce the same yield as this lithium-ion technology does yet.
What I think is really interesting too, if you look at the history, Mike, as you mentioned, of energy or of some of these more traditional industries, huge upfront investment that goes through really volatile cycles of booms and busts, right? And what that means for the communities where that's taking place. I mean, so part of our mission, right, with Tulsa Innovation Labs is based in the history of Tulsa and our concentration in the energy industry, and our volatile economy is simply based on that concentration in a specific place. I mean, it's a city that's endured, right? But you look at even some smaller communities that have been boom and bust towns, and you think about how do we sort of smooth the demand for this and plan for it in a way that kind of guards against some of those really volatile and really destructive sort of forces that I guess can influence these extractive economies.
Mariya, final thoughts?
No, I just wanted to say fantastic points, everybody. And it's interesting that behind every piece of technology, behind every innovation, there's always people. And I feel like with this, it's very, very easy, chasing the sustainability or the green aspect of it and trying to revolutionize mobility will compromise on the lives, on the health, and on the future of others who are less fortunate or less able to almost resist that powerful innovation machine, shall we call it. And it's interesting, Dawn, as you mentioned, sort of learning between automotive industry and aerospace industry, and it's definitely important to learn from each other. Aerospace industries is trying to reach the scale and the speeds of production that is sort of very, very famous in automotive when it comes to especially drones and air vehicles, air taxis production. But we won't get there very soon unless we sort of sit down there and share our lessons learned and share best practices and start talking, start collaborating. I think there are fantastic examples in the past where the batteries have been reused and recycled for, say, emergency relief after and reused in, say, to power buildings after earthquakes. I think we need to think about that whole life cycle and that whole chain of events, literally, chain of events, metaphorically speaking, and how almost the domino effect. And as you have all correctly mentioned, yes, there's so many aspects to it: the social, the environmental, and it's not wise to only consider the technological aspect of it. It's very, very important to look into, again, the shortages not only of talent and manufacturing equipment and construction material, but also the effect that all of this fantastic investment into green mobility of the future, what it would have on economies and on communities around the world. So, no, fantastic discussion. Thank you. I'm glad that you've enjoyed reading this.
Yeah, I love that you said all technology kind of leads back to humans, and we need to remember the humans that are impacted by it, because I think that will flow into my article. But we're going to take a quick break just to thank our sponsors. We have True Weather, who joined up last show, and we had a great episode with Don Birchoff on the Full Tilt. I commend you to listen to it. And if you want to know what the phrase jelly in my veins means, you're going to have to go check out that episode. We also have Tulsa Innovation Labs, who's been supporting us for a while now. Thank you. Skydio and Airspace Link. We appreciate what our sponsors do for this show and making it possible. We also appreciate you, the audience, who contributes. We got Sarah Sultani out there giving me a whole bunch of emojis. I'm going to start with red heart shape. And then she's got waving hands. So thank you for adding some liveliness to the chat. We appreciate it. All right, so my article is up next. And in fact, I think the best episode of the show was about ChatGPT. I was pretty psyched about it at the time. I still actually really enjoy utilizing this technology, but immediately after using it, I found the walls, as I do when I'm, tooling around with something new, and I saw a discontinuity between what people, especially in the tech sector, were saying this thing was doing, what it was capable of, and how they were treating it versus what it actually was. So a GPT in general is basically, the best way I've heard it described is a plausible next word predictor. So there's no theory of mind when this thing is operating, but most people, because of the way it's able to respond to you in a pastiche of kind of human-sounding sentences, people tend to kind of react to it in a more human way and ascribe capabilities to it that it doesn't have. And if you think that's just being negative, it seems that the founder of OpenAI, who's the company behind this technology, is saying exactly that. That it's getting overhyped. People assume we have an artificial general intelligence, and we don't. Also, there's been a lot of rumors about how many parameters the next version will have, and to explain why parameters don't matter, if you do 10,000 coin flips versus 100,000 coin flips, the linear regression of that is still 50%. So maybe some favor to the heavier side of the coin, but you get the idea that more parameters does not necessarily mean more accuracy, and in fact, some topics might become more accurate while others become less in. So that's the evolution of the technology. I also wanted to bring up this article, or it was a podcast with Ezra Klein. Never listened to his podcast before, but he had a person on, Gary, I can't remember his last name on, but he was talking about major errors that this technology kind of puts out there because of its plausible next word model. And the way he tested this was he asked, what is significant about the first future Jewish president of the United States? And its response was, religion shouldn't be a factor for who gets elected to president of the United States. So clearly there's guardrails on the system that they're not telling us about. And that answer is actually not satisfactory because it would be a momentous moment for people of the Jewish faith to finally have a representative in the seat. So I just kind of wanted to open up the discussion to AI in general, what people think about it, social impacts, etc. Who wants to go first?
Can I go first? I'd love to. You raised something there, Mike, about parameters, bias. We've seen AI become racist when it's deployed on Twitter, etc. And I really thought some of these interview points were interesting, particularly about the bias issue where, Altman basically says, look, it's going to take longer, but, that's kind of up to the user to decide, this is how I want my AI to behave, right? I'm going to mold it into my AI, which I thought was kind of an interesting concept because the user may not be creating the AI. Like the AI, somebody else in the back is like feeding the AI data sets. And so, or it's gathering them from the internet, which is, God knows what's on there. So that's the first point. The second point, two other points I want to make real quick. He answered that question of, hey, is ChatGPT going to kill Google? And I thought his answer was really good here. He said, hey, look, they're going to make a counter move. They're really smart people. They're pretty competent. Just kind of dismiss that like they're almost like there's room for everybody. And last but not least, and this is one, as a former professor, really strikes home for me, this concern about plagiarism. And I actually love his answer. And you guys might be surprised by this, but his answer was, look, we're in a new world now. Generated text is something we're going to need to adapt to. He likened it to a calculator, right? Like, so we used to have people like with a pen and, a pencil and paper, like putting
Show your work.
But, now we let them use calculators. So, if you're going to use ChatGPT to write an essay, then schools need to adapt and not just be, he didn't say this, but, to me, the corollary to what he's saying is adapt and don't penalize. And honestly, on that last point, I kind of agree. I will be honest with you, when I was teaching at college and even post-grad, it's just like open book, open internet. Like, I just want to know that you can coalesce ideas. And even if you're using this tool, you have to put in a search. So you have to kind of know what you're looking for, first of all. Then you have to still edit it, so it's not just a bunch of junk, to make sure it's accurate, right? So there is a gloss over here. There is activity going on. And I'm just like, so what? Like, let them do it, because you know what? In the real world and in their jobs, they're going to be using this stuff. So why are you penalizing people for using it? Why are you calling it play? As long as you're citing, to the art, I think that's the key here. And maybe that's the missing link. As long as you're citing, like, that's not plagiarism to me. And why not? So I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on that or something else, but let's go with Daniel first.
Yeah, it's a really good point on the educational point in particular. I think is extremely interesting. I mean, what's been so interesting to me about this conversation since ChatGPT has come out is just the extent to which it's permeated into all parts of our society, right? It's really part of the public discourse. It's reached so far beyond the tech industry or AI experts or really the people who were paying attention previously. And what's interesting to Mike's point about ChatGPT to me is that it feels real, right? So even if it's not an AGI, it feels like an AGI. And what that's forcing people to do is confront what they've been hearing about for decades, right? So we've been hearing about for years or even decades, right? What AI is going to mean. how disruptive this is going to be. And I think that we've been slow in our systems. Our educational system's a great example. We've been slow to adapt to what that really is. And whether or not we're all the way there yet, the release of this tool that's available to the public, that's open, right, is making people kind of at all levels start to confront and really understand what this shift is going to mean and how we're going to have to adapt. So I think that for that reason, the usefulness or the imperfections or all of that are up for debate, I suppose, or even if they're not up for debate, it'll be interesting to see how they develop further. But despite all of that, and kind of regardless of all of that, this feels like a big moment for our acceptance and our sort of acknowledgement of the extent of what this shift is going to mean.
Yeah, I made a comment on Twitter. You can find the post somewhere, where they were talking about that exact shift with grading and whatnot. And I said, any teacher who is still grading without an understanding that the internet exists, this is the wake-up call. Because even when I was going to college, you could get templates that were basically a baseline of human knowledge about a topic, and you had to add something on top of it so it didn't look plagiarized. And you had to paraphrase, and you had to do additional research. And that's the problem solving. And you shouldn't say, because all of this human knowledge exists, you shouldn't be able to use it. And that's really all ChatGPT is doing, is giving you access to the baseline average. And you know what? Sometimes the average is garbage, or wrong. So it behooves the student to add more. So Mariya, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, no, this is a very, very interesting discussion. And I don't think I understand the issue as much as you guys do, or in fact, put it this way, come in contact with it as often here. But I'd say the few thoughts from me are, well, I think the output is only as great as the input. And if the AI is studying the responses and studying the inputs that we as humans provide it, be it through social media or the dictionaries or whatever it is, it's very much studying who we are and our approaches to answering and formulating sentences and formulating thoughts. And I think we as a society have definitely changed in the ways that we communicate and the ways that we respond. And I wouldn't say we've degraded, not at all, but it certainly is very, very different. And so it's interesting to see that, that Sam's saying that people are beginning to be disappointed. But I feel like it is almost a bit of a reflection of who we are and where we're moving as a society and some of those changes. And AI, again, is almost that mirror that you sort of put towards us and, towards the society and show where we are. What's interesting is probably thinking about that public perception, again, wearing sort of my public perception hat and public engagement and education, and how that can potentially stop the scale up of the technology and the adoption of the technology. And indeed, how would one overcome the negative public perception when it comes to AI? And I didn't have the answer to that question, but if any of you do, well, I'll be interested. But indeed, I think, again, it's always that human element, isn't it? No matter how great the technology is, no matter how much we'll keep improving it and keep pushing the boundaries and pushing the limits and educating it, there'll always be those who will be dissatisfied and say, no, it's absolutely rubbish. And, what do you do? Do you ignore them? Do you educate them? What do you do with that negative perception?
Yeah, and you know what? There's been a lot more negative perception, I think, because this is sort of a Cambrian explosion in terms of utility of AI. Like, a lot of these algorithms already existed, but people have built useful UIs on them. That's really what ChatGPT is doing. It's been around since last year, like, without the chat. So you could have used it, but you needed to kind of be a programmer to kind of understand how to access it via API properly. And then also with all of the art generation programs, it was the fact that they've become accessible. Again, those algorithms have existed for months and sometimes years. And the negative perception, I think, is coming in different waves in different industries, depending on how threatened they feel by the technology. So artists feel extremely threatened by it because the truth is, computers couldn't produce anything that didn't feel mathematical. There's a lot of beautiful generative art out there, but if you can we're good at pattern recognition as humans. You can feel the math, right? Whereas you don't really feel the math on these image generators, and they're objectively beautiful in some cases. So I think a lot of it is going to be kind of a growing negotiation between each industry that's impacted by this, and I think I think this kind of round of tech, because of everything that's happened on the political side with social media and just the internet in general, and where we ended up versus what we thought this majestic, optimistic, utopian technology would be, I think people are a little wiser to just taking the whole tech industry's word for what this technology is going to mean for them. So I think it would behoove the tech people to just have a little less hubris. And actually, Sam here, if you compare this to him 6 months ago, this is a huge step back from what I would consider a more arrogant position about his own technology. And that's good. I think we just need to be more honest about what it's good at. And that makes it more interesting, because ultimately reality is going to kick in anyway. So,
I want to say, to Maria's point, the kind of nexus of humans and AI is the public perception piece, right? And Mike, to your point, artists are now suing over, the use of the AI to basically copy their IP, their thoughts, their style. And I think that kind of collision of people's own creativity, of their own thoughts, and how it comes out through this AI is where the rubber is going to meet the road. How much additional human input makes it no longer just a pure AI product, and okay, again, if there's attribution in some way. I mean, look, the reality is, I think we all, in our lives, we look around, and whether it's writing an article for school, or writing a test answer for school, or painting a painting, we look around and we kind of mimic things, other people's work, nature, and that's what AI is doing, just in a quicker, easier way. So I think it's a great segue, honestly, Mike, to this last article that I chose, because here we have now essentially, drum roll, AI in the courtroom. So again, like, what's the role of humans? What's the role of AI? And so this article is about they're calling it an AI powered robot lawyer, but look, there's no robot sitting next to somebody. It's through a Bluetooth, and this AI is feeding information to people to fight traffic tickets in court. And oh, by the way, the company is called Do Not Pay, and the AI runs on a smartphone. It listens to the court arguments, so it has a presence in the courtroom, and then it helps formulate responses for the defendant, whispers them in this person's ear, at which point they can then, say just maybe even verbatim say the same exact answer to a judge or to a jury. Really interesting. This AI company has been using its templates to win more than 2 million customer service disputes in court cases thus far. And what they're saying is, hey, if you use our service and you lose, then we're going to cover your fines. Okay. And so here's the rub. Okay. I'm a lawyer, and it cost me a lot of money, and I had to spend 3 years in law school. And I think in the UK, to be a barrister, it's similar all around the world. There's additional advanced schooling for a reason for lawyers. And, as I read this article, I thought to myself, I've been in so many situations, and it harkens me back to this coffee mug I saw one time. It says, "Do not confuse your Google search with my law degree." And, I love that mug, because a colleague and I, we'd be in these meetings. I'm not going to say the location, but it was during my employment in the Air Force when I was a civilian. You can figure it out. And, we just hear people yammering about stuff, and we just look at each other and think, coffee mug, right? It's just like, look, they trained us for a reason. We have specific experience. when you have advanced licensure, like being a doctor, being a lawyer, in the drone world, you've got this whole tension between mappers and surveyors. Surveyors is like some crazy amount of schooling and apprenticeships you need. So there's some friction there too. It's this intersection of technology and humans. What part do the humans play? And honestly, for lawyers in particular, not only do we have to take 3 years of school, spend a whole bunch of money to do that, at least in the US, and then take a bar exam and successfully pass that. Oh, and by the way, every year get professional development credit, right? So it's called continuing legal education. So every year, everybody, by the way, I'm running a Law Tech Connect event workshop at AUVSI where you can get your CLE credit, but that aside, there's a reason for that. And there are ethical rules that we also have to abide by, that if we violate those, like candor to the tribunal is one, competence is another, you can lose your license. And so, how I understand the accessibility arguments here, like, oh, some people can't afford a lawyer, this is a great way. But on the other hand, you know what? There are public defenders available. And there are resources available, a lot of nonprofits with trained lawyers, or at least people in law school that are acting under the auspices of a trained and licensed attorney. So there's my thoughts there. Obviously a little biased because I am an attorney. So this is kind of interesting. Daniel, over to you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really liked your point about the advanced schooling and advanced degree, and especially the comparison to doctors, right? Because where I come from in economic development, there's an acute and growing labor shortage across a lot of these industries. And I think part of the best case scenario for AI, not necessarily that this is where we're going, right? But the best case scenario for AI is that really fills some of those gaps. So in the medical community, there's a concept of working at what's called the top of your license. Which essentially means that if you're a doctor and you have a medical degree, you should only be doing things that only doctors can do, right? You should not be doing things that nurses can do because a nurse can do that. Nurses should not be filing paperwork because someone without a nursing degree can do that, right? So it's the concept of addressing this larger shortage by basically making sure that people are working at the level that they're trained for, and that's where the lion's share of their effort and their time are going to. And I think what was really interesting about this article to me, and about your points about it as well, is across a lot of these industries, there are specific kind of repeatable tasks that are maybe good places for AI to interject, just like this, right? So, your point about the complexity of the law and not being sort of as streamlined or as easy to navigate as a lot of lay people think is very well taken. But I wonder, is disputing traffic tickets something that is the best use of a lawyer's time, or something like that, right? So is there an opportunity for this to step in and take some of the more tedious and less complex components off of the plate of lawyers or the legal profession in general, just like there is potentially in the medical profession or in professions all over the place? That obviously has huge impacts in terms of how we're training people and for what roles, because if some of these less complex or more easily repeatable tasks are being taken over by AI or AI technologies, that puts people, makes the people doing those tasks especially vulnerable to disruption. So anyway, a lot to tackle, but I really was interested in this article specifically from thinking about how it can essentially free up our most highly educated and most specially trained people to use their skills by taking things off their plate that don't require that advanced training necessarily.
Mike, do you have any thought? I have thoughts, but I'm going to wait till the end.
I have lots of thoughts, but the dog is really barking, so let's let Mariya take it and hope that he quiets down.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you. I think this is a fantastic article, and Dawn, it was really fascinating for me to read about it. I think it's interesting to see how DoDP are promising to cover any fines in case the robot lawyer loses the case. My question is, well, fines is one thing, and again, I see the whole financial aspect of it, but how about someone's life? We're talking about somebody's life at stake. We're talking about much more than just losing money. and being reimbursed for it for a decision that's not in your favor. We're talking about really deciding upon someone's future. And I think this really has a totally different side to it. I don't think it can be measured as much in money and financial reimbursement by the CEO of the company. It's interesting, and again, it's interesting to see that 2 million people have already agreed to it. And I wonder, what was the selling point to them? Was it solely the financial aspect? Why would somebody choose to opt against having a person right there by their side who you can talk to, who you can take advice from, who is definitely, again, as yourself, schooled in it, has got loads of experience? Is it solely the financial aspect? And if that is the case, then what can we do about it? I know you've mentioned the public defenders are available. I know here in the UK, probably drawing parallels with our healthcare, very, very different, of course, in the US, but we've got loads of public healthcare available, so our NHS services. And I know that to get doctor's appointments, especially for, say, for instance, dentistry services, is near impossible. And the wait is a couple of years. So I would see that why, in some cases like that, why would somebody choose to go for an alternative route? But indeed, again, if there are options, if there are cheap and affordable and options where a human who has been put through that degree, who has that experience, has all that knowledge, can be present, I really don't understand why would somebody go for an AI powered solution instead.
You raised, Maria, you raised a great point too on the financial side. I didn't think about it till you just said that. It's one thing to pay off your fine, but depending on how many tickets you have, you could wind up in jail. You could have your insurance rates greatly increased on a monthly basis. It could be a very difficult financial burden for some people. So, there are these kind of second, third order, effects of even something as simple as a traffic ticket. And I feel there is a substantial difference between a consumer complaint because Southwest canceled my flight, and instead of spending hours and hours on a phone trying to get through or filing a complaint online, if I could have AI do that for me, great. I mean, I pity the companies that have to address all these AI response complaints. It's almost like a battle of the AI, but that is to me qualitatively different than defending your life, liberty, property, which, those are the three kind of keystone things in our Constitution in the US anyway, which derives from obviously British law, with AI. And Daniel, to your point, I see this different, yes, a traffic ticket is different than being up on first degree murder charges. Absolutely. It just depends on what it means to that person. Every case is different. Every case is unique. What I don't like about, I have no issue with someone prepping in advance and using AI to prep, just like writing their exam, whatever, great. Make it your own, check with other people. But to be listening in the courtroom in real time, assimilating information and feeding a response, I think is also very different than just doing your homework, if you will, and walking into the courtroom to defend yourself because you can't afford a real lawyer or you choose not to bring somebody on board. So Mike, are you able to speak now?
Yeah, well, I'm going to try. So I agree with Daniel's point that there's going to be certain activities that there's a skills gap on, and we see this across our society on multiple domains, multiple levels. And also just a general willingness of people to do some of this drudge work. I will say that let's take as premise a future where there's at least a tool-assisted lawyer, right? So they have an AI tool at their dispense, like you were saying. Even in those circumstances, how can we verify the answer, that it's accurate? And all that kind of rolls into, I think this is a cute headline, but I don't think that this technology is ready for this yet. And that this company is unafraid to kind of open doors. That's their whole thing. They settled an issue with their bank using this tool. I think it was the founder himself that did that. Now, and it impersonated his voice while it did it, because the information only would have been accessible to him. So that's a whole other frontier that we're going to have to deal with on a legal level. And there's going to be people that try to exploit it and get through. But I think we need to start setting a precedent that if you use these things, it needs to be announced. And if you're caught, then there's a fine, penalty, or possibly jail time for misusing this technology to misrepresent, plagiarize, or avoid I just think that needs to be addressed right off the bat, because there's the imitation factor. But that aside, going back to tool assisted future, what might take a whole bunch of legal aids months to scan through in terms of paperwork to try and find precedent, especially in our case law system, to try and understand how the judge will react. Now that can easily be reduced or brought to fore more readily without burning human eyeballs to the ground. Because let's face it, that's actually not even a productive use of the legal aids. It'd be much better to say, of these things that we have brought to the top, which do we think the judge will be most responsive to get our client's best possible result?
Yeah, go ahead, Daniel.
No, just wanted to chime in briefly back to the ChatGPT thing, right? Because what's really fascinating about it is not the content it's able to produce, but how quickly it's able to do it, right? So to Mike's point in particular, I mean, the efficiency gains, I think back, this is a few years old and maybe out of date, right? But I think it was an article in the New York Times profiling a public defender who essentially had a 4 or 5 year backlog. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of cases to take on, right? And it's less so whether, I think we'd all agree, right? And certainly the legal profession would agree and stand up on behalf of the fact that there are certain things that an AI just can't do that a lawyer needs to. The question mostly is, what does a lawyer do that can be done just as easily by an AI? And I think that whether it's in the sort of paralegal level or legal aid level or something like that, I think that there's a lot of professions are going to have to take a hard look, I think, at where those efficiencies can really be reached with AI in their specific profession. And I think that it's going to vary, but it'll be surprising and really disruptive for a whole host of different industries.
And I think using technology as a tool to aid, whether it's in this case an AI helping a legal professional, whether a paralegal or lawyer, great. Whether it's a drone, right, being used to analyze a crop for precision agriculture and having software on the back end that does those analytics and makes things better. Awesome. I'm all for that. I just think it's really interesting that, during in this article, it said, what the quote was, ChatGPT is very good at holding conversations, but it's terrible at knowing the law. We've had to retrain these AIs to know the law. And just in closing, this reminded me of 21 Jump Street, where you got the guys looking at the two guys and saying, we're sent, you bleepers are going to college. It's just like, we're sending AI to law school. It's just like, really? Are we? I mean, is that where we are now? So I think it's a dangerous thing. And oh, by the way, there is a thing called practicing law without a license. And it wouldn't surprise me if they break into the wrong courtroom. It seems like they've been doing their homework, by the way, a little bit, because they said there were 200 cases and they can only use this in 2. That tells you something right there. But if for some reason
thought it was an easy win.
Yeah, well, that's a good point too. Bad facts make bad laws, they say.
Yeah, but send your AI in. We've got a guilty verdict ready for you.
That's right. It's a horrible case. We're not taking this one. Real interesting times indeed when we've got AI eking its way into the courtroom as a legal advisor, taking over the role of lawyer. I just don't see it, but more to follow, I guess.
All right, that's it for today. I could talk for hours about this topic. We barely even talked about the necessity of the AI could solve the procedural side of legal proceedings, but there are so much human interaction. What about that public defender that's got a good relationship with the prosecutor and is able to say, look, this is a good kid? If we're going to pretend like those conversations don't happen and that the AI can replace them, I think we're being a little bit naive. But we've got some great topics coming up this week. Great shows hosted by Dawn and Maggie Schuster. And then we'll be returning next week, I think, with a special guest. So, Dawn, tell us what's coming up.
Yeah. So Wednesday on the Dawn of Drones, we've got Dean Etchards from Volatus Aerospace talking about all the new technologies that they've subsumed into the Volatosphere. So more to follow there Wednesday, 9 a.m. on AUVSI channels at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. And then Thursday on Drawn Law Connections, 11 a.m. Mountain Time, Maggie Schuster, our host, will be interviewing Cam Shell from Dragonfly as we kick off a new month dedicated to protectors and defenders. So it should be really great stuff. And I'd like to be able to tell you who our guest is next week on Full Tilt. Hoping to hear back today. I'm pretty sure I know who it is, but I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. Follow us on social and you'll find out, and tune in next Tuesday at 9 a.m. Mountain for our leadership podcast, The Full Tilt.
So I'd like to thank our guests, Daniel and Maria. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, True Weather, Tulsa Innovation Labs, Skydio, and Airspace Link. I'd also like to give a nice shout out to my barking dog today, who has made it 60 minutes through the entire episode. And finally, thank our audience. Thank you for all that you do for the show. You've helped us grow significantly. We're almost a half a year into this, and without you, it wouldn't be possible. That's it for today. We are out here.